Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ocean Stories Podcast. I'm Lydia, and it's nice to see you. I hope that you're having an amazing day and you're ready to hear some ocean stories because that is what this episode is going to be. If you are orca obsessed, then this episode is for you. I don't have much in the way of ocean news to talk about today, but last night I did take a screenshot because CNN on Facebook posted something and it was so cute. It reminded me of, do you know when the solar eclipse happened a few months ago? And there was all of this stuff going around like, wow, it's so cute and sweet how humans, despite everything, all our differences and how annoying we are and strange we all get together and get these glasses and go in big fields and stare at the sky and marvel at how amazing our Earth is and how amazing our solar system is and just how cute that is. This reminded me of that. This was the headline that CNN posted. A rare 7.3-foot hoodwinker sunfish washed ashore in Oregon this week, and tons of people flocked to the beach to look at the strange fish. Okay, what? I'm going to post a picture on Ocean Stories of what the fish looks like so that you can know what I'm talking about. It looks like a giant blob with an eye. It's just so cute that all the people in this town in Oregon were like, we got to go check out this fish that washed up. Rest in peace to the fish. It is crazy that it was 7 feet long. I wonder what happened to it. I didn't actually read the article. I'm sorry. I just took a screenshot. But I just thought that was so cute. And it reminded me of this other video that's been going around. If you haven't seen it, it's like this guy, I think he's 38, and on his 38th birthday, he's from Michigan. He goes to see the ocean for the first time, and he freaks out. He starts crying. He can't believe how beautiful it is. 38 years old, and he had never seen the ocean. And it just makes me think how lucky I am to have seen it. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, you've seen it too. If you've never seen the ocean and you're listening to this, please contact me so I can try to remedy that as soon as possible. But those are just like some cute, feel good little tidbits relating to the ocean I thought I would mention. It's sweet when we marvel at the beauty of the world. Okay, but into today's interview, we're talking to the Orca Man, or at least that's how he's known online. His name is Fred. And he has a huge community of orca lovers across all his platforms. He just puts out a bunch of interesting content about orca whales, and people love it. He puts a ton of time, effort, and enthusiasm into his content, and it really connects people online with the world of orcas, which is so important for conservation and just for awareness and for people to feel connected to such a cool species that they might not be able to see otherwise in their daily lives. As a side note, this interview is done by both Sarah and I. It's pre-recorded. This episode is quite sciencey in the beginning. We talk about how the orcas have a new species delineation. So if you're into that or you've been curious about that, you've seen it and you want to learn more, we talk about that in the beginning. If you're not into that at all, skip past that part because in the second half, we talk about how Fred became the Orca Man. We talk about his land-based whale watching guide, which it seems like he's poured his heart and soul into it and it's free. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you want to see some whales, I know that's a very specific situation to be in, but just in case you are in that situation, listen to that part. And we also at the end talk about really interesting orca lore and like stories about how some of the first orca whales were captured and where they were, which is obviously not the happiest thing, but it's super interesting. And I also think I say something along the lines of like, wow, humans are so weird. Humans are so freaky. We are like, we just do the weirdest stuff and do, we do weird stuff and we're just strange. We make weird decisions and I don't know. So it's a really fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take a look at your surroundings right now and just feel peace. I hope you feel like you're in the exact spot that you are meant to be. That's the energy that I'm channeling into this episode today. Sit back, relax, and talk to you later.
Welcome back to another episode of the Ocean Stories podcast. Today we are speaking with the Orca Man. This is what I'm going to refer you to. So our first question is always, where in the world are you right now?
Absolutely. I am lucky to be in Vancouver, BC. So Vancouver, British Columbia, like southwest coast of Canada. Um, Been here for about 7 years now.
It's funny because you've done such an amazing job, like branding yourself and branding the Orca Man, that when I was trying to reach out to you to set up this interview, I literally could not find your full name. Like it took me a really long time to be able to find it. I'm like, what's his name? Because I wasn't sure if it was professional to reach out to you and be like, "Dear the Orca Man."
That's completely fair, and it's pseudo. It was kind of unintentional at the start. The etymology of the name, like I didn't start out as the Orca Man, but once it started, I was just like, oh, I'll just put this on everything. It'll be easy for anybody to remember. And now I think the only place that you can find my actual name is on my website. That's the only place where it says, my name is Fred and I am the Orca Man specifically, but it's one of the only places on any of my platforms that I've like explicitly said it.
That is so fun. I think we should like gatekeep your last name so that people, if they want to know, they have to visit your website and see whatever you
Absolutely.
have on it.
That'd be awesome.
But walk us through like how did you become this? How did this start? Like take us all the way back to the beginning before there was any name when you were just Fred.
The story is strange, and I know you guys have had Kendra Nelson on the podcast as well, and her and I have pseudo similar stories. Mine begins when I was 3. My parents bought a minivan. So Chevy in 2002 came out with a Warner Brothers edition minivan, where like the kind with like the there's like a screen in the back and you could put in a DVD and it would play. And so for us, it came with the movie Free Willy, and I had it on repeat. And that was my introduction more than anything else. And so I watched Free Willy. I wanted to be a killer whale trainer initially, and that was like kind of my draw. I was like, oh, okay, like I want to get into this. I want to be the kid, whatever. And then progressing from there, I wanted to go to school in the Pacific Northwest. As soon as I figured out, more about the wild research and conservation that was happening, I knew it was a place that I wanted to be a part of. And so in 2017, I started at the University of British Columbia out here. I ended up doing geography, but a lot of my kind of like focus was environmental history and like, you know, trying to figure out how to make orca information, whether it be sightings or like the catalogs, a little bit better. That hasn't come to anything, but the Orca Man has come from it on the other side. One of, the specific avenues where the Orca Man started as an inception, I really wanted while I was in school to like develop a project about introducing people to all of the world's killer whales, because a lot of the information is like everywhere. Different organizations are doing different things, and so I was like, oh, let's just put it all together in one place. It was a bit of a big project, and so COVID happened. Everybody started going on TikTok, and I was like, maybe that's my roommate said maybe TikTok would be a good option for you, and I was like, okay, I'll give that a shot, and thus the Orca Man was born.
What was your first video?
Yeah, you can you can get back to all of them on TikTok pretty easily. You can scroll all the way down, but it's the first one is a compilation of like different clips of me basically giving fun facts about Free Willy. Talking about how, when it came out in 1993, it was 11th in the box office. It was in front of Nightmare Before Christmas that year. Like, it was a more seen movie than that. And The Sandlot, if either one of you know that movie, it's like a baseball movie from the States in that time. And some other, like, weird facts around it. But it was trying to make an internet video by somebody who'd never, like, posted on the internet before. And my ones after that, I, like, tried slowly but surely to start telling some of the early stories of killer whales, especially around the Pacific Northwest. It was what I was learning at the time with the environmental history stuff. And then some really small skits about like various aspects of things that were going on through that time. But it hurts to watch them now.
I feel like every content creator of all sorts goes through that. Like, if you look back
Yeah.
on the first ones, you're like, oh my goodness, this cannot be on the internet, but it will be forever now. I kind of have this is kind of sidetracking here, but I need to get it
Yeah.
out. I have an orca question. I saw all over Instagram a couple of weeks ago that there was
Yes.
something happening. Some sort of a new classification, some sort of there is different type of orcas now.
I'm so glad you're
I
asking this.
honestly did not spend enough time. I just saw it, but I just couldn't fully fathom what was going on. And I was like, okay, I'll come back to this. Never came back to it to this point. So can you please explain what's going on?
Absolutely. March of 2024 has been a crazy year for kind of orca news. And insofar as the new classifications, so Orca lore was dropped on March 27th specifically. There was a paper that came out delineating two populations here in the Pacific coast of North America, actually, as their own species. So I'll start this by saying, technically, so Orcinus orca is the genus and species of, the whales we know, orcas, killer whales. And so that we get the name orca from the species name. The proposal is, for these two populations, they are genetically separate enough, and we have enough information on them and data, both morphologically with their structures, their like bodily structures, as well as their genetic histories and diets and otherwise, that we can. They believe that they can be classified as their own species. There's still processes that need to happen, but it's officially been proposed. What that means, though, is that these two populations of orcas will technically not be orcas anymore. So the two names, there's for residents and transients here in the Pacific Northwest. The residents are fish eaters, so there's ones we hear about eating Chinook salmon and other types of fish and really not deviating from that. And then the transients, which eat mammals, seals, sea lions, porpoises, whales.
Can we go back to ground zero for 1 second and explain the term species? So just, I'm always thinking of like dogs, like what falls under the category of like species if you say they're not called orca anymore? Like what's like the what are the tiers in this whole thing?
Yeah, where's the line is always a great question, and it's one that a lot of people, even on my videos and other people's that have been putting up, have been asking. And the answer, as far as I've come to understand it, in terms of like the taxonomic world, is it really depends. But there's a few delineations that can, help us determine the differences. The first of which is genetic diversity. So for resident versus transient populations, they've been able to do genetic testing on both of these populations of whales and have determined that they've been genetically separate for hundreds of thousands of years. So they may look very similar to somebody who doesn't follow orcas too well. Even for myself, I have a hard time distinguishing between transients and residents. Is something I'm personally trying to get better at. But that all to say that they do look very similar, but these populations have not crossed genetically in hundreds of thousands of years, which is an incredible amount of time. And so the delineations for populations that are distinctly separate, both genetically, so they haven't been connected in a long time, as well as morphologically is another bit. So the difference between transients and residents when it comes to their like physical characteristics. Transients have a little bit more of a robust jaw or mandible to take apart and ideally hunt that larger prey, the mammals, the sea lions, the seals, and otherwise. Whereas the residents will have a little bit smaller ones. And so that, happens over time, but it is evidence of that kind of distinction that occurs. So for this specifically, those are the two characteristics that I would put forward. I have the paper up if you want to go through some of the actual specifics. I thought that this might come up.
Well, okay. So just so I understand, because
I was on the same. I was like,
it's a lot of stuff.
I want to be able to explain these things to my mom. My mom's number one podcast fan, and I always want to be able to explain it to myself and to my mom. So it seems like two orca populations, the residents and the transients.
Yes.
Those are just their names. And one of them eats, well, there's more than two, but this is what we're talking about right now. One of them eats the salmon.
Yes.
And one of them eats more bigger food.
Yeah.
English is also failing me. English and science is failing me right now. So one of them has a bigger jaw, the one that eats the bigger food.
Yes.
And the paper that came out is now saying that they are potentially a different species because evolution has happened so much.
Yes, and so the clarification that I'll make is like new species in terms of like we're able to classify them as a new species. They're still within the
Okay.
genus Orcinus, so like they're similar in so many ways
Like
to
a
a
new
lot of other orcas.
classification.
Exactly, and so like new species in general, where you can determine that they're on their own genetic path, is definitely correct.
So you would say they would not ever mate. Like there would not be babies from the transients and the residents.
Exactly.
But could that technically happen? Would that be like a donkey and horse situation? Sorry,
So it's no, it's a
Trying
great
to
question because
understand.
we've
We're like, what
Yeah,
would
yeah.
happen if they?
100%. You never know. And so this is a question that I haven't looked into incredibly myself, and I think the answer surprisingly comes from captivity to see whether or not it's actually happened. Because that's one thing. The capture era here in the Pacific Northwest, they didn't know that there was residents and transients. They just caught killer whales, and so there is a potential that throughout that time there was a transient and a resident in the same place. I have heard that there hasn't been a resident and a transient calf, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked and like guarantee that myself. And so there's full potential that it could be a viable offspring, but 200,000 years or several hundred thousands of years of genetic differences in that sense constitute the fact that in the wild it will never happen. It hasn't these two populations like dare I say, avoid each other at all costs. More so, the transients, the mammal eaters, really are almost. This is a weird way to put it, and this is not based on scientific anything, but almost like scared of the residents. Like if residents show up, transients will leave. Is a thing that has been seen. That's not scientifically backed. That's like.
So
Yeah,
you say like the ones that are eating the bigger food, quote unquote, are the scaredy cats?
Supposedly. There's no
Wow.
scientific backing. There's no
Okay.
scientific backing.
Anecdotal.
Anecdotal.
Nobody's gonna come for you.
But yeah,
I know that there were tons of orca sightings off the coast of San Diego where we live recently, or like the
Cool.
past 6 months. And you get some like mildly disturbing footage of them like eating a dolphin. So they would probably be the transients, right? Wait, did I mix it up now?
no. You're on the right path because transients eat they eat the mammals.
Okay.
Like larger sea life. The orcas that are in San Diego, and I could be wrong. I believe I'm quite close on this. I believe those are the eastern tropical Pacific orcas. So it's not quite transients. Transients ranges are usually from about mid California up until Bering Strait is the right term. The end of Alaska into Russia. So it's more than the northern part of that. The eastern tropical Pacific whales, which are the ones that will show up in San Diego every so often, they will make their way around the tropics of the Pacific more than anything else. Their name is very well apted for that. But they do hunt. They're in the classification of orca that has been evolved to hunt larger prey, like dolphins, porpoises. We hear them talking about humpbacks and gray whales and stuff like that. They are a larger prey population, if you would.
This is so interesting. Like 6 months ago, I just knew the term orca/killer whale, and I thought it was all one. I thought the ones that are playing with the sailboats, and the ones that are eating sharks in South Africa, and the ones that are popping up on the coast here, and the salmon eating ones, they're all just the exact same one. So my mind is blown. I'm like, whoa.
This is like on the backs of 60 years have research that people have been doing on these two specific species, and like one of the biggest reasons and like what it means for the species themselves, and the reason why at the very least I'm kind of excited about this happening is because these species are proposed and potentially will go through as accepted. Then we can use these classifications of the species of the residents and the transients, or specifically, Ader and Rectopinus in this instance, as avenues for legislation. Because then we can classify this species as because it is a legal. It becomes to a degree a legal term. Whereas ecotype, which is the main thing used, is not quite. You can't use it as much within law as far as I know. And so advocacy is going to increase and like be able to, provide more with regard to like putting through bills and things like that. At least as far as I understand it. So the protections can increase by differentiating them specifically, because orcas have been on the ICUN red list, which is like the the big classification of endangered, and all of the other classifications of like the status of a population, haven't been able to effectively classify orcas because they've been data deficient, treating them as a whole species around the world, because nobody's doing as much research on every single population of killer whales as they would for these two populations, which, if they are their own species, then could be classified and are.
That makes sense.
That makes sense.
In a lot of
Okay.
areas. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think of it like in a lot of areas of not only this, not only marine animals, but giving something a name is like the first step to researching it more, for it getting more attention, for people being able to get funding and all of these types of things. That's kind of what I got from what you said. So
Absolutely.
it all checks out to me. Fun though. Okay, like new species, like you never know.
Absolutely. I'll put one clarification in there too for anybody listening,
Sorry,
because I
not
went on
new,
one
but-
big. Yeah, it absolutely. We can still call them orcas. The orcas will always be an accepted name for any of the Orcinus genus. That anything that we call an orca right now will always be okay to call them orcas. I know that was one.
That's
fear.
awesome. That's good. Otherwise,
For us-
this
for us,
podcast would have
that's
been yeah. This podcast
get
shut down if
canceled.
not.
Yeah.
So I want to know a little bit more about your current work. I mean, you're the Orca Man, but what are you working on? Are you an Orca Man and doing research at the moment, or are you mostly focused on like content? We always love to talk about all sorts of ocean careers, so I'm really excited to hear what you're working on currently.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My purview at this point. So, to give a background of myself with regard to schooling, I did do a Bachelor of Arts in Geography. So I don't have a science background. I'm not doing any research specifically. And when I started the Orca Man platform, the idea that I'm kind of building off of is, if I can connect people to killer whales and in tangent the natural world, Earth, then it would provide greater avenue for people to feed their interests, like a lot of what you guys are doing right now, trying to make things accessible for people to learn and get excited about things. And then you can turn that into real action one way or another when it comes to, being able to introduce new ideas into people's lives, or be able to actually, make changes in legislation in your local communities and otherwise. So for me, this summer particularly, my goal is to get as many people as I can in the Pacific Northwest to see orcas this summer. That comes in the form of a land-based whale watching guide initially that I've put together. So I have a list of 28 spots up and down the coast, from like the bottom of Seattle up until midway through Vancouver Island on the east coast, of places where you can see whales. And you can find other lists of like this, of like land-based whale watching sites, like the Whale Trail does it here as well. But the thing that I've put together is the different sightings, organizations, and groups around, as well as some of the tools, so the land-based tools. So we're thinking hydrophones that are publicly accessible, live cameras and stuff like that. So for anybody can go and access it for free on my website. And the idea is, if you go there and you follow the sightings reports and around the places that you can find orcas, potentially you could go see them just with your car and the right amount of timing this summer. And so that is my current big project that I'm working on. And it's hopefully going to get a lot of people out more than anything else.
We love that. That's amazing. That's a really cool resource.
It's good
It's
fun.
like super in line with, I mean, we have been talking so much in the same vein of like, we also want to encourage people to go appreciate the nature that they want to conserve. Like, get outside, explore, like, connect to the ocean, to the sea, go see a whale with that guide. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's the the crux. I think there's a lot of audios going around on TikTok or Instagram right now that are like, the first thing to getting somebody to protect something is to get them to love it. And so if you can provide any accessible avenue to do that, a podcast that anybody can listen to, a guide that they can use to go out. And it's another thing where it's like, it's low cost in entry. So long as you put in the effort, you are able to get something out of it. And I think that that's like the big goal of what I think I would like to continue doing. So it's kind of the idea of like, I want to send people on adventures. Like,
I want to know, what was one of your favorite orca encounters, or when was your first one, maybe too?
yeah, so the two are different. So I grew up, my parents are so my mom is from LA. And so we grew up going to visit some of her family in Southern California. And so I actually grew up going to SeaWorld San Diego. It was the most accessible. At the time, I was, I think the first time I saw a killer whale, I was probably 4 when my parents brought me, and it was a factor of like, oh, this is around, and this is what we can introduce. And so had to have been around that time was like the first time I laid eyes. And as the story goes, we showed up. I sat down at the killer whale tank, and they were like, "We want to go see other stuff," and I was like, "No, we're gonna sit here for a bit." But my favorite not interaction, but instance was actually the first time that I came out to the Pacific Northwest. I was 14 or 15, and I took my dad on a trip. I like worked a few summer jobs and tried to get the money together to do it. So we got out here. We had like a week on San Juan Island, which is an island in the Gulf of Seattle. So it's like a little bit north of Seattle there. And at that time, there was a whale that I had was adopted for me a few years prior, Alki J36. She is a southern resident killer whale. And it turned out that throughout that trip, I actually, got notification that there was orcas on the west side of the island. So we rushed out to go and find and try to see them. And the pod was going by. There was a naturalist there that was kind enough to let us know that it was not only J-pod, but Alki that we were seeing go. And it was for the first time to the Pacific Northwest to see a whale that I had been following for, a few years at that point in time. I don't know if I like cried or was just in shock. It was insane.
So someone adopted a whale to you, and you happened to see that whale? Like, that was the first time you...
It was my first time seeing orcas in like the wild, and it was, oh my god, incredible. I don't think I've seen her since. I've lived here for 7 years, and it still hasn't happened. It was just the first time that I went out that somehow the stars aligned and it worked. That was the case. That was a factor. Like I said, you'd never know when you're going to have an experience, let alone with whatever whale it is.
We keep saying.
She's been around. Well, I've been keeping tabs on her. She's just been,
good. I'm like,
4 to 7 hours away, and I'm like, I can't make it that quick.
We keep saying there's magic in the ocean and all the ocean stories, and I just refuse to believe that this is all just chance. I'm like, no.
Oh yeah.
No, she was meant to pop up that day and right there.
Mm-hmm.
Does Alki have any children?
Makes it exciting.
Oh, sorry. I want to know everything about your adopted whale.
Absolutely. So, Alki had one son. They named him Sonic. He only lived for 2 years. So he was born in like 2016, 2017, and sadly passed away, I believe, in 2019. So to give some context to, how I kind of Alki's a big part of how I've come to be the Orca Man, in fact. So like learning about her and her family and kind of following her journey from, when time I was in middle school. There's a love and appreciation that comes with that, of being able to follow, an animal for that long that you will only hear about through research or otherwise. When I started thinking about, the broader projects that I wanted to do, I actually pitched one to the University of British Columbia as like the, let's make orcas accessible on all fronts, and let's make the research, easily findable. Know who's, working in whatever, where the conservation organizations are. And so Alky's son was Sonic, and so I named the Project Sonic as like, okay, we want to know as much as we can because I believe that is going to be the thing that brings people to love, care, and protect. And it's that excitement, it's that joy, it's that wonder of like, oh my God, this is an incredible thing that I'm, witnessing and being able to experience with this species, with this whale. And so to share that is the greatest thing that I have thought that I could do with the knowledge and excitement.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit? Oh, this is kind of sad, but now that we know her calf passed away, I know that orcas have like pretty strong social structures, and I believe that they can even grieve. And well, I guess this is all assumptions, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I find that really interesting.
Yeah, so the grieving process that we've seen in killer whales is definitely, it's well documented. And when I say well documented, I don't necessarily mean like scientifically confirmed. It's a thing that people anecdotally have seen throughout different populations' lives. I know Tahlequah back in, I don't know, sometime within the past 5 to 7 years, there was the whale who carried her calf for 1 to 2 weeks. It was the line of mourning. I think it was something to that degree. When we look at killer whales' brains, we'll start there. Some of their sections of their brain, emotional processing, communication, and things like that, are not disproportionately large. They're larger than some of ours with regard to relation to the entirety of the brain. And so there is an underlying assumption that people have, I'm not even going to say scientists, I want to be very specific, that not only do they have the capacity to feel, but it's very strong. And so on that front, there has been a lot of people, both, friends, people that work in conservation, that have seen multiple instances of this kind of grieving process that is incredibly sad. And a lot of people in captivity too, you'll see whenever whales are transported, where calf dies, where even one of the tank mates has something go wrong. There is a social structure in there that is not, I don't know if well understood is the right way to put it, but it's hard not to impart human feelings onto them in that instance. They're closer to us than we think they are, is what I'll say to that, as far as at least what I consider it to be.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's always so hard to not compare an animal to us because that's all we know. But I feel like it also, in some instances, really helps us understand and also build like a closer relationship and like empathy for them. So yeah, that's super interesting. I am sad because I'll have to head off to a work commitment that I couldn't move, but Lydia will finish this, and I cannot wait to listen back.
I'd imagine that a bunch of fun facts, fun stories, scenarios with these animals, and probably other marine animals too. One of my favorite things to hear about are those stories where you're just like, how is that even possible? Or a fact where you're like, why isn't everybody talking about this?
I definitely have those. And so the first one is very specific. One of the reasons that we can know about as much about orcas as we do, especially the ones in the Pacific Northwest, but like all of them, is that we can identify orcas without tagging them and without getting information. By sight, with their dorsal fins, their eye patches, and their saddle patches, we know who each one is. To the point, and this is a plug for Orchid Conservancy at the moment, where you can make flashcards of, for those of you who are listening online, I'm showing there's different flashcards for like specific whales. So like L38 has a specific fin shape and specific saddle patch on both sides, right? Now,
I love how you had those right there. Like you've been studying them.
I have my, it's my new goal for this year is to try and get better at killer whale IDs. And so this pack is like Southern Residents and otherwise. But the really crazy part of it for me is that somebody had to figure that out. And this is a thing that I think I've thought that I have a lot of, like, electricity is weird and being able to, but like somebody had to identify, be like, okay, no, we can identify killer whales by their dorsal fins. And the gentleman who did is, along with a lot of other scientists, is Dr. Michael Bigg. And so he started research back in the 1970s about killer whales, specifically trying to get a census of orcas for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada. At the same time around, there was the same thing happening in the U.S. Because because orcas were being taken for captivity, they needed to have a stock of the whales to know how many catching was sustainable. So that was where the inception of it all began. But he proved that you could identify killer whales by their dorsal fins and otherwise, and that to me is like a research principle to like have not now been put all over the world. And I'm not sure if that came before tagging fluke, like the flukes of humpback whales as well, but that idea of like coming to understand that, and that research allowing us to allowing anybody to be able to buy a set of flashcards and learn the wild killer whales that are in our local waters, to me is like ridiculously insane.
Yeah, like such a pinnacle discovery. Like that is such a turning point in science, in the science of understanding and tracking the animals. To think about the person discovering that, or like to think about the person who put in all the time, effort, and the people, I'm sure it wasn't just one person, to discover that is totally mind-blowing and also inspiring.
It is, and it changed his life for that degree. So transient killer whales, and I've been calling them transients, I should have made the clarification at the beginning, they're also called Bigg's orcas because he is the one who delineated and was able to figure out and like took pictures of a whole bunch of killer whales and then sat down and started looking through, being like, oh, like I know who that one is. And then over 20 years of research was able to develop this incredible body of work along with a lot of other, like I said, fantastic people, to put that together. Like, oh my, that era of like 1960 to 1980 is insane to me for the way in which everybody kind of put the start of orca knowledge together.
The reason it inspires me is because all of these things started with just an idea. Someone at one point had to be the first person to have the idea of, I wonder, can we tag and view and categorize and see which one is which by this shape or this pattern or XYZ? And for it to go from an idea to a flashcard set is like a really cool thing to me to think about that. Like
the origins of captivity in the Pacific Northwest kind of kicked the research and everything else off. And so the stories for the start of that, as much as it's incredible to think, that somebody was able to realize, dorsal fins can be identified from, just photographs, and we can do photo IDs and learn about these orcas over time and be able to continuously follow them. Before that was somebody had the idea of like, oh, I want to go and like capture a killer whale. I want to go and swim with a killer whale, which in its own right at that time is absolutely insane. And as we know now, or I'll say as we know now, but like in general is like not a good thing. No, point blank period is not a good thing. But in the beginning of this session, at the beginning of, the 70s in this instance, or the 60s, 1964, a killer whale gets harpooned off the coast of Saturna Island in an effort to make a life-size model for the Vancouver Aquarium here in Vancouver, BC. This whale's name is Moby Doll. If you want to read the story about...
So they harpooned it and killed it because they were trying to make a life-size replica.
Yes, absolutely. And here's a few things.
That seems a little bit crazy.
It is. And to think about it in a different way, right? One, no killer whale had ever been... There had been killer whales that were like washed up in certain places and people like had them around. But the Vancouver Aquarium wanted to put something together that was really special. And so they were like, okay, we want to do a life-size model. This was before they thought of like capturing orcas in that instance. Although one guy was, and we'll get to that in a second. What the idea that they had to go do this was, for an animal which at the time everybody not only was scared of but hated. Like the fishing industry hated the orcas because they scared all the fish away and they thought that they were like ruining their catches. And other people thought that orcas were, dangerous and harmful and like the demons of the sea, which is a known kind of like feeling for orcas around that time and beforehand everywhere. So orca PR really bad in 1960s, in the early 1960s.
Wild.
Yeah,
They had a
exactly.
bad
So like
rep.
no, yeah, huge bad rep. They're like, it's awful. And the first decade of killer whales that were in captivity that were caught from the wild, a greater majority of them had bullet holes in them because people would shoot at the whales when they would go by. Like people
Oh my
hated
gosh.
these whales.
What?
Yeah, like
It's kind of reminding me of sharks right now.
it
A
is
little bit.
absolutely.
Like
Yeah, well,
bad
because
reputation, but people
yeah,
shooting at them in the water, that's like next level. That's really
I
bad.
and some of the people that I've talked to, because I've like gotten a lot of opportunities throughout this time, like some of the people who started out with Michael Biggin doing that, they can remember when they were children, like there was orcas going by, they would like go down with their BB gun, like as children, as like this is what you do. And this is not to say that this is like Western people coming into the Pacific Northwest that are having these opinions and doing this. The indigenous communities have
That is
consistently like
wow.
held this in revere. But yeah,
Okay, I'm following. So,
okay, so killer whales changed the world. So they Murray Newman is the head of the Vancouver Aquarium. He sends off Joseph Bauer and John Burrich, or one of those two names, like some combination of those two names, to go and harpoon a killer whale off of Saturn Island in British Columbia, to then go underwater, take photos of it, and create a life-size model. The last day, there was like a 3-month stint where they were camping on the side of the island waiting for whales. They were literally the day that they were packing up their tent. Burrich was like going to like shave because they hadn't shaved in 3 months. And Bauer, like, I don't know which one of them, but like one of them grabbed his shaving kit and threw it over the side of the cliff and said, "No, you're not. Like, we've like got our beards this long. We're gonna keep them." And when he went to go over and look like where his shaving kit was, that's when the orcas went by. So there's a pot of orcas that go by. Last day they're about to leave. They go down, harpoon it. Saturn Island gets notified. People are like, "Oh my god, they caught it! Like, I have a killer whale." Everybody goes down with their guns because that's what you do. Birch and Bauer are down there. They're trying to get the line in. The whale didn't die. They go out in a rowboat and see that the other whales are trying to keep this small whale up. Long story short, they don't want to kill it, and so they end up transporting it with the harpoon inside. This is a very graphic story. I'm sorry for anybody that didn't put that earlier. They tow it to Vancouver, which is like more than 100-ish miles, if not like, yeah, it's an incredibly long way. But that they tow it with the harpoon inside. This was not a whale that was intended to be captured for captivity's sake. They bring it to Vancouver. Moby Doll stays in Vancouver for about 2 months. It was one of the longest stints of a killer whale in captivity at that time. And it provided the public its first full look at a killer whale for like longer than 2 seconds going by. Because nobody cared, nobody was looking, nobody's paying attention. Moby Doll dies. About a year later, a killer whale gets caught in like a fisherman's nets. Like, so a fisherman's nets, go across a little cove and there's a killer whale caught inside. The fishermen are like, "Oh, there was a killer whale that was down in the Vancouver Aquarium. Let's call the aquarium and see if they are interested in purchasing the whale." Because they're like, maybe we can get some money out of this. They already lost their fishing gear in the storm, whatever. They call Murray Newman, the guy at the Vancouver Aquarium who put out for the scale model. He didn't want it, so they called Ted Griffin, who was a gentleman who made the Seattle Aquarium at the time, and was actively trying to catch a killer whale himself to no avail. He had been going for like a year and couldn't do it. Ted says he's in, and the long and the short of it, like I said, is that the fishermen basically say like, "Okay, like we've had this whale in for too long. If you come up in 24 hours with $8,000, we'll give you the whale." And Ted Griffin didn't have $8,000. He was running this aquarium on a shoestring. So he went around Seattle with a pillowcase, asking the people around for money so that he could go and purchase the killer whale later that day. And then he would be like, I'll pay you all back once the whale is down here and we start making money. Gets his literal pillowcase full of cash, goes to Namu, British Columbia, and sits down with the fisherman. Is like, okay, I have all of the money here. We're good. And the fishermen were like, okay, one last thing. You can have the whale only if you beat me in an arm wrestle. So the fisherman challenged Ted to an arm wrestle to take possession of the whale, to know that he was serious about like taking care of it and protecting it, whatever else. It's a real thing. So they did the arm wrestle, and Ted won. And then he like built a pen for Namu, and towed Namu, but with like the pen behind a boat from Namu, British Columbia, which is above Vancouver Island. So this was like a month and a half trip down to Seattle, where Namu was the first killer whale that was in captivity for like any serious bit of time, and ended up kind of like jump starting, killer whale captivity in the Pacific Northwest and the world, dare I say. But it started with $8,000 in a pillowcase and an arm wrestle. And I'm not saying it's good. I'm not, I'm very grateful that we've come to the research and conservation that we have today. But that's just insane. Like a lot of male toxic energy, but like that's insane.
What a story. It makes me think about humans. Like, we are so weird. We just do the weirdest things. Everything has to go to, well, I really want to own it and buy it, so I'm going to walk around and ask people for money. Okay, hustle to get the whale. And then, on top of that, for someone to be like, well, I kind of want to sell my whale because he's not going to do so good here, but I'm going to like make it a little bit spicy, so let's just settle it with an arm wrestle.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't even want just the money. He also wanted to be defeated. Or I don't know. It's like, we do the weirdest things and make the weirdest decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a time that a lot of people are making some crazy ones, to say the least.
Well, I feel like I'm happy to know that story now. And what was the whale's name?
The second whale, correct? The one that he purchased?
Yes. Yeah.
So that whale was named Namu. Namu.
Okay.
Which sounds very similar to another whale we all know, because after Ted got Namu, he went out and captured a mate for him, a small female whale that they brought in, and which he sold then to SeaWorld, who wanted the rights to the name Namu, but he didn't want to give them up because Namu was a big name, and so they decided to name the whale Namu. That's where we get Shamu from.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So, don't tell me that the Shamu at the SeaWorld in Florida is that whale.
That whale specifically died not long after it was put into SeaWorld. It was used as a stage name thereafter for a lot of the shows throughout the SeaWorld parks. And so every whale was, in essence, a Shamu, like every whale is an orca or a killer whale, right? It was a stage name that was developed.
You have mentioned a lot of really good ocean stories. So thank you, because that is literally the name of the show and what we are trying to do. But we have one question that we ask to everyone, and it might be hard for you because I feel like you've used all of your best ocean stories already. And the question is, what is your favorite ocean story or ocean memory?
When I first came out here, because I've thought about, working in and around killer whales my entire life. It's something that has brought me more joy and wonder than I could have ever imagined, and that more than almost anything else has ever done for me. So coming out here to study was one of the like big moments in my life, to feel settled in this part of the world, in a place that I, just thinking about it makes me wonder, like brings me to tears almost. And I remember leaving after my first year of school, and I was on a plane home, and we drove over the San Juan Islands, like the Gulf Islands around here, and it was sunset, and I still have the photo. And it was a sense of like, one, I appreciate so much everything that this place has given to me, and I am so incredibly excited and honored to be able to be here now and build a life. It was like a year after building a life in the Pacific Northwest and feeling connected to it, and knowing that I wanted to give back and that I was going to, and didn't know what that looked like at the moment. And I feel like that sense of wonder and excitement is kind of the place that I wanted to keep on sitting in and keep on working towards sitting in. And so I think that that would be one of my favorites, is looking down and being, both excited and anticipating and appreciative of being in a place that is as wonderful as this. And so that would be my answer.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so
Yeah.
beautiful. And I think you tapped on something that a lot of the people we have on have in common, including you as a parent from the last however long we've been talking, is just this love and appreciation for the ocean, for ocean creatures, what have you, because we've had lots of different types of people on, but they all have in
Mm-hmm.
common like this gratitude for the earth, and that connection can take form in a lot of different ways. But when you were sharing that story, it just made me think, wow, a lot of the people working in the ocean space are really amazing. They're really like connected to the gift and the gifts that nature gives us. And that is something that really inspires me and why I love talking to them so much all the time.
Well, even more so, I'll say an appreciation to both yourself and Sarah for putting this together on the front of like bringing some of those stories to light. Because even, I post online, Kendra posts online, a lot of the other people that I've seen you have on do as well in different ways of like, oh, this thing is exciting one way or another, but getting the opportunity to sit down and kind of share that, that joy, wonder, amazement, whatever you want to call it, and gratitude is a special thing.
Yes, well, thanks. Yay, I'm so happy. And I'm really glad that you came on. People love the orca, so if you're an orca lover, I hope that you loved this episode. And if you have never heard of the Orca Man, then you should absolutely go check him out. We'll link all the Orca Man stuff in the show notes. First name Fred, last name is a secret, and you have to go to his website to find it out and to check out those whale watching guides if you happen to be in that area. I don't know if we have any listeners in that area. It would be so cool if we did, though,
That'd be awesome.
because then they can check it out.
Bring me on. You can find me at the Orca Man on a lot of stuff.